Hello, and welcome to the Central Coast Poetry Shows, and I'm your host, Jim Russo. My reason for producing this show is this. For about 15 years, I've been reading and attending poetry readings all over California's Central Coast, and during that time, I've had the privilege of hearing and seeing some very talented poets read their own words. This show is to be a platform for those poets to be seen and heard by you. Tonight's guest is Danusha Lameris. Danusha Lameris is a longtime Santa Cruz resident who came here at 18 years old to attend UCSC. Her first book, The Moons of August, in Autumn Press 2014, was chosen by Laureate as the winner of the Autumn House Press Poetry Prize. Her poems have been published or are forthcoming in the Best American Poetry 2017, the New York Times, the American Poetry Review, the Gettysburg Review, Plowshares, and Tin House. She's completed a second manuscript, Bonfire Opera, and teaches poetry through private mentoring and workshops. She's also our new Santa Cruz County Poet Laureate. And now I'd like to introduce you to my first guest, Danusha Lameris. Thank you for coming.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Of course, we've known each other for a long time, kind of reading off and on together.
Yeah, and I think I saw you maybe the first time when Jean Herschild came years ago. That's my first memory, I think, of seeing you. At Cabrillo when she came to read. Which was a delightful evening.
Yeah. So, what would you like to speak to this evening? Tell us about.
Oh, in general, let's see. Gosh, what would I like to speak to? Well, I am, as you mentioned, the incoming Poet Laureate, the new Poet Laureate of Santa Cruz County. And under that role, I get to think about how I'd like to bring poetry into the community at large, which obviously is something you're already doing wonderfully. Yeah. And I'm going to be having a new radio show out with the new radio station in town, KSQD.
Squid.
Yeah, also called K-Squid, which I think is a great name for a show on the morning.
We'll all shorten it as it gets going.
Just Squid. Yeah, I think that's what's going to end up happening.
Yeah.
And the logo is a little squid. And yeah.
So what's your plan for the show?
So the plan for the show is it's called The Hive, and it's a poetry collective. So I am one of the hosts of the show, but there are 4 or 5 other hosts as well.
Oh, cool.
And so you get different perspectives and different, everyone's got their own tastes around writing or their own connections or their own part of the poetry world that they're involved in. So these are all poets and writers and, people who have different perspective and different things that they love about poetry that they want to share.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great. To have more than one voice leading it.
I think that's the point of it. And that, that way listeners get to experience really a range of perspectives. Because some people feel like, narrative poetry, that's what poetry is. It's poetry that tells a story. For other people, it's, they love a lyric poem, a poem that maybe has a lot of images in it and that maybe isn't quite as narrative. Right. So
more abstract.
A little more. So I think it'll give people some different flavors. Yeah, it'll be like tapas.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
So what else? What else
am I up to? The other thing I'm up to under that, project, which is a 2-year position, if you will, I was doing poetry pop-ups. And my idea for that is to have poetry readings that take place in communities that are not poetry-related communities.
As the laureate, you want to start this?
Yeah, and so this could be anything in the county. It could be through any organization. There are several places I'm looking at contacting and a few that I've started talking to. One will be at the place where I practice yoga and have been going for years.
Outstanding.
And we're looking at having an event around Valentine's Day that will be partly a poetry event, but in a place that's not a usual poetry venue.
Oh. So, we'll get all those what am I looking for? Those closet poets to come out and admit that they're into it, that they enjoy it, and that they like to see it and hear it more.
Right. It allows people to hear poetry or to participate maybe in reading themselves. There can be an open mic component to that. So if people want to contact me about that, I would love that. If they have communities they're part of or lead that would love to, or kind of curious even about doing a collaboration and having a poetry event, I'm interested in that.
Well, that's great because
Thanks.
like I say, there's so many people that, maybe 1 out of 10 working at the beer factory is into poetry. And,
Right.
and you can bring that person something, and the others,
Right.
that they haven't experienced before.
Yeah, and it's fun to have that kind of cross-pollination. I remember years ago I had a friend who was, we were just out of college, we were young, and he was a police officer who loved to read Neruda and to quote and recite Neruda. And that's just not an overlap that you necessarily expect, but
Right.
of course,
Right.
That's going to happen too.
So before we close out this segment, I wanted to ask you about your upcoming manuscript. I'd like you to promote it a little bit.
Yeah, well,
Tell us
it's
what you're up
not
to.
yet in the body. It's sort of, in that amorphous state where it's floating out in the ethers and has gone out to a couple of publishers to read it. So we'll see how that goes. And it's called Bonfire Opera, after a poem I wrote about a woman in town who used to she was an opera singer, trained as an opera singer, and she would go to parties and take off all her clothes and sing opera.
Oh, my kind of girl.
I know. Probably
My
a
kind
lot
of
of
girl.
people's kind of girl. I mean, who hates that,
I'm always the first to take my clothes off.
Sing opera, though?
Anything.
Anything.
Yeah.
So, yes, that is the
It didn't quite
muse for
come
the
out right,
title.
Well, what I'd like to ask you now, Danusha, is, and I ask this of all my guests, of all the poems you've written, do you have a favorite?
Kind of.
What's
I
it?
have, usually it's whatever I've written the most
I
recently,
know.
but in this case, I have a poem at the top of the pile that I'm happy to read.
Good. Well, I'm going to ask you to step to the podium, read that poem first, if you would.
Okay.
And then give us all that you have.
All right, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Danusha Lameris, our current Santa Cruz County Poet Laureate.
Berkeley. And then there were those winters in Berkeley, if you can call them winters. Rain falling sideways against the brown shingled houses along Benvenue. La Méditerranée with its little wrought iron tables covered in tile. Sipping lemon chicken soup and reading Vonnegut. I loved the decay of Telegraph Avenue, its street vendors hawking cheap silver pendants, the old gypsy whose name meant good with horses, who told me someday I'd have a string of feminine men as lovers. Across the world, the wall was falling in Germany, the Soviet Union collapsing. Men and women with PhDs and Russian accents arrived selling colorful scarves and offering to do odd jobs. What I remember is walking into the wind, holding my wool coat tight around my chest. How you could almost feel the world tilting on its axis right beneath your feet. I'd pass the ramshackle cottages off Euclid with their dark rooms and disarray of roses, and dream of the lives hidden within. It's not that I was happy. I was too young to be happy. Knew only its first blush, not the darker tones that come after and give it shape. But somehow I found the small, almost unnoticeable gateways that led there. The torn edge of a baguette hot from the oven, the acrid smell of the ginkgo when you walk underneath and step on the broken pods. Sitting at Roma, watching a beautiful man lean over a pile of textbooks as he sips his coffee, and almost, but doesn't quite, lift his head to see you. Omens. Out here, we read everything as a sign. The coyote in its scruffed coat bending to eat a broken persimmon on the ground. The mess of crows that fills the apple tree, makes a racket, lifts off. In between, quiet. The winter fog is a blank. I wish I could make sense of the child's empty bed, the bullet hole through my brother's heart. The mailman drops a package on the front stoop, and the neighbor's dog won't stop barking. I tread down the stairs lightly. Because we can't know what comes next, we say, The plum tree is blooming early. There are buck antlers lying in the grass. A mountain lion left its footprints by the bridge. And if there's something I keep going back to, I think it's the Garden of Eden. And so this poem came from that tendency. Eve after. Did she know there was more to life than lions licking the furred ears of lambs, fruit trees dropping their fat bounty, the years droning on without argument? Too much quiet is never a good sign. Isn't there always something itching beneath the surface? But what could she say? The larder was full and they were beautiful, their bodies new as the day they were made. Each morning, the same flowers broke through the rich soil. The birds sang again in perfect pitch. It was only at night when they lay together in the dark that it was almost palpable, the vague sadness unnamed. Foolishness, betrayal, call it what you will. What a relief to feel the weight fall into her palm, and after, not to pretend anymore that the terrible calm was paradise. I always tell my students that you can take anything and write about anything, which is partly what I love about poetry. And this is a poem about dust. Dust. It covers everything. Fine powder, the earth's gold breath falling softly on the dark wood dresser. Blue ceramic bowls, picture frames on the wall. It wafts up from canyons carried on the wind, on the wings of birds, in the rough fur of animals as they rise from the ground. Sometimes it's copper, sometimes dark as ink. In great storms, it even crosses the sea. Once, when my grandmother was a girl, a strong gale lifted red dust from Africa and took it thousands of miles away to the Caribbean, where people swept it from their doorsteps, kept it in small jars, reminder of that other home. Gandhi said, "The seeker after truth should be humbler than the dust. Wherever we go, it follows." I take a damp cloth, swipe the windowsills, the lamp's taut shade, run a finger over the dining room table, and still it returns, settling in the gaps between floorboards, gilding the edges of unread books. What could be more loyal, more lonely, and unsung? Here's another poem that's a Berkeley poem, and that also addresses one of the great mysteries of my childhood. It's called Service Station. "You're beautiful, sister. Eat more fruit," said the attendant every time my mother pulled into the 76 off Ashby Avenue. We never knew why. She didn't ask, and he didn't explain. My brother and I would look at each other sideways in the back seat, eyebrows raised, though Lord knows we'd lived in Berkeley long enough. He smiled when he said it, then wiped the windows and pumped the gas. I liked the little ritual. Always the same order of events, same lack of discussion. Could he sense something? Attuned to an absence of vitamin C? Or was it just a kind of flirting, a way of tossing her an apple, a peach? It's true my mother had a hidden ailment of which she seldom spoke. And true, she never thought herself a beauty, since in those days you had to choose between smart and beautiful, and beauty was not the obvious choice for a skinny, bookish girl, especially in Barbados. No wonder she became devout, forsaking nearly everything but God and science. And later she suffered at the hands of my father, whom she loved, and who'd somehow lost control of his right fist and his conscience. Whose sister was she then? Sister of the early rise, the 5 o'clock commute, the centrifuge, sister of burnt dreams. But didn't her Savior speak in parables? Isn't that the language of the holy? Why wouldn't he come to her like this, with a kind face and dark, grease-smeared arms, to lean over the windshield of her silver Ford sedan and bring tidings of her unclaimed loveliness, as he filled the car with fuel and told her, as a brother, to go ahead, partake of the garden, and eat of it. Here's a poem for a girl I knew many years ago, a girl who's now a young woman. It's called Hawks, and it's for Luna. It was late afternoon, and we were standing on the deck overlooking the gray swath of the Pacific, when my friend's daughter, then 4, turned to me and pointed at the hawks flying in the distance. "I can call them if I want," she said, tilting her head back to let out a long, fierce caw which floated up over the marsh and above the trees. At first, nothing. Then a slash in the distance, and in the next moment, there it was, nearly above us, wings spread wide, the color of rust. And then another. The two floating in silent circles while she sounded her cries, the primal cry of the human, raw and plain. The call to prayer, the weeping at the wall, the singer's highest, most broken note. Whatever it is we send up into oblivion, waiting, haven't I too called out? Haven't I beseeched something winged to do my bidding? And here she was calling, and here they came in answer, this hinged assembly, hovering toward us on the wind. 10, 20? Enough to darken the heavens above where we stood, waited in place, pinned by a cover of raptors, bone swallowers, snake eaters, sharp-sighted angels of prey, their scaled feet clutching the empty sky. For a while that I can barely remember, though in a significant time in history, it was 1976, my family lived in Beirut, Lebanon, and here's a poem that comes partly from that experience. Arabic. I don't remember the sounds rising from below my breastbone, though I spoke that golden language with the girls of Beirut. Playing hopscotch on the hot asphalt, we called out to our mothers for lemonade. And when the men walking home from work stooped down, slipped us coins for candy, we thanked them. At the market, I understood the bargaining of the butcher, the vendors of fig and bread. In Arabic, I whispered into the tufted ears of a donkey, professing my love. And in Arabic, I sang at school or dreamt at night. There is an Arab saying, "Sad are only those who understand." What did I know then of the endless trail of losses? In the years that have passed, I've buried a lover, a brother, a son. At night, the low drumroll of bombs eroded the edges of the city. The girls, who knows what has been taken from them? For a brief season, I woke to a man who would whisper to me in Arabic, then tap the valley of my sternum, ask me to repeat each word, coaxing the rusty syllables from my throat. "See," he said, "they're still there. though even that memory is faint. And maybe he was right. What's gone is not quite gone, but lingers. Not the language, but the bones of the language. Not the beloved, but the dark bed the beloved makes inside our bodies. The watch. At night, my husband takes it off, puts it on the dresser beside his wallet and keys, laying down for a moment the accoutrements of manhood. Sometimes, when he's not looking, I pick it up, savor the weight, the dark face ticked with silver, the brown ostrich leather band with its little goosebumps raised as the flesh is raised in pleasure. He had wanted a watch and was pleased when I gave it to him. And since we've been together 10 years, it seemed like the occasion for the gift of a watch, a recognition of the intricate achievements of marriage, its many negotiations and nameless triumphs. But tonight, when I saw it lying there among his crumpled receipts and scattered pennies, I thought of my brother's wife coming home from the coroner, carrying his rings, his watch, in a clear Ziploc bag, and how we sat at the table and emptied them into our palms, their slight pressure, all that remained of him. How odd the way a watch keeps going, even after the heart has stopped. My grandfather was a watchmaker and spent his life in Holland, leaning over a clean, well-lit table, a surgeon of time, attending to the inner workings, spring, escapement, balance wheel. I can't take it back. The way the man I love is already disappearing into this mechanism of metal and hide, this accountant of hours that holds with such precise indifference all the minutes of his life. The cat. After my brother died, his wife was sure he was living inside their cat, Rocky. He's in there, she'd say, staring into those blank yellow eyes. Ismail? Ismail? Can you hear me? She'd tell anyone who came by how the cat would slip into their bed, put a paw on her cheek and just look at her, or other times crawl under the covers, turning his furred back to her chest. My brother had picked out the cat when it was just a kitten, brought it home for his kids. And there it was, still roaming the hallways he would never set foot in again. He'd miss driving them to school, making them pancakes, reading them to sleep at night. So even though he took himself out of their lives with a single bullet aimed at his heart, I see now that if he could, he'd find his way back to those he loved, not as a ghost, but to walk again among them, almost silently, on his tender paws. Perhaps it was the least he could do, to pad up the stairs, only the heat of his small body to offer, his cool and steady eyes. I think often we write about our irritants in order to somehow change our relationship to them. And this is a poem called Scrub Jays. And it begins with an epigraph. When we pay attention to nature's music, we find that everything on the earth contributes to its harmony. Hazrat Inayat Khan. All morning, they've been screeching back and forth between the oak tree and the roof, bickering over bits of cat food pinched from the metal bowl by the door. When song was handed out, the lark and nightingale got there first. Who can blame the jays for raiding the robin's nest, its pale and delicate eggs, for tearing the dark red plums straight from each other's beaks? Who can blame the ear in its ignorance for wanting music and failing to hear it? And now for another irritant, mosquitoes. Thin buzz of hunger, constant hum. At night I drape a net around my bed just to keep them away. They like the flesh above my ankles best, and then the sweetness of my face. The Buddhists say we mustn't want to kill another living thing. How often have I taken one, crushed it in my palm? A saint said the lion is in love with the gazelle it hunts. I love salmon, so I saute their bodies with garlic and butter, slip the moist flesh in my mouth. And haven't I bitten my beloved until a pink stain colored the skin? A tiny drop of blood is all they want. Is that so much to ask? And they are so devoted. Groupies at the backstage door, a band of Hare Krishnas wailing in the street, cherubim playing their small harps without cease, as they are said to do in heaven. Only this is not heaven. I dream of a night without blemish, of love without the sting. But here they are, a mini mariachi hovering outside the net, singing their same old high-pitched serenade. Volver, volver, they cry, the song about the one that got away. This is a poem to my eye doctor. I don't know if that's a genre of poetry that's very widespread, but perhaps it will be. It's called Improvement, and I did send it to him after my last checkup. Improvement. The optometrist says my eyes are getting better each year. Soon he'll have to lower my prescription. What's next? The light step I had at 6, all the gray hairs back to brown, skin taut as a drum. My improved eyes and I walked around town and celebrated. We took in the letters of the marquee, the individual leaves filling out the branches of the sycamore, an early moon. So much goes downhill. Joints wearing out with every mile. The delicate folds of the eardrum exhausted from years of listening. I'm grateful for small victories. The way the heart still beats time in the cathedral of the ribs. And the mind, watching its parade of thoughts enter and leave, begins to see them for what they are: jugglers, fire swallowers, acrobats, tossing their batons into the air.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Danusha Lameris. Thank you for watching. This has been Jim Russo, the host of Central Coast Poetry Shows. Come and find us again. Good night.
I'm beating up the street tonight.